So, you want to get into homebrewing for D&D and you want to start with magic items. Let's get into that. Today, I don't really want to go into the process of how I make a magic item, but rather what makes a magic item good. This obviously varies from DM to DM or from player to player. There are some players who prefer having just a plus modifier to their weapon so they hit more often and a little harder, rather than having some complicated effect that they have to remember for the next time they want to use the item. And even other players are actually satisfied with items that only have flavor. If we look at the Cloak of Billowing, for example, I think it's very much a fan favorite item that a lot of your players will appreciate just for having, even though it doesn't technically do anything other than billow your cloak. And even though it is only flavor, it is still an amazing magic item. I personally have some criteria that magic items need to fit for me to consider them a good fit for my campaign, so I want to get into those 10 things. I consider a good magic item to at least fit 2 of these categories. Let's jump right into it and get into the first criteria that a magic item needs to answer positively. One of the simplest categories that you can actually fit an item into: is the item unique in any way? Most items will be unique in some way. Even I have an item that is literally just a pirate hat that took an already existing spell, weakened it a little bit, put a condition on it, and voila, I have a new magic item. It is not the most unique or most innovative item there is, but it is unique in the way that there is no item that does this thing. I say this with only half knowledge though. There are over 6,000 official magic items in Dungeons & Dragons, and I don't think there's any DM in the world that knows every single magic item off by heart. If you happen to have an idea for a magic item and you come across a magic item from the official source books and you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's just my magic item, so it turns out it existed all along. No one's gonna judge you for that. Everyone's gonna make magic items eventually that already exist in one way or another. There are so many magic items out there that it's not a surprise that some overlap in the idea. Out of 7 billion people, there will be another person that has the same idea as you. But that does not make your magic item any less good or any less unique. Just remember that. Chapter 2 is a bit more of a hard category to hit on every single item because some items are not designed to do this exact thing. Does your item have this X factor to it? Is it like an ace up the sleeve that players can use in a dire situation to turn the tables and turn a fight into an epic, memorable moment that they will talk about 3 years from now? Taking the example with the pirate hat from chapter 1, you will see that this item is this X Factor item up to a certain level. It is literally just Meteor Swarm on an item toned down a little bit. While Meteor Swarm is in itself already a game changer spell, you will quickly notice that on an item that is kind of overpowered, but giving the item a lifetime makes it more balanced and they have to think about when they use it. It's not something that comes back like spell slots would. On top of that, items like this give you the chance to explore fights a lot better. I might make an extra video just going into how to make a fun, engaging, and dynamic fight in the future, and I think this is where you can really utilize items that have this X factor thing to them. Let's say you have a very strong boss fight happening in the future. A level 10, 11 or 12 adventuring party will not have access to a powerful spell like Meteor Swarm, but a watered down version of it can turn the tide of a battle to make that fight memorable for them. When they remembered, oh, I found this magic item 5 sessions ago and now finally we have a reason to use it, and 3 weeks later you guys are still talking about it because it was a great climax and narrated by good DMs like everyone who's watching this. So remember, in high tension, these ace in the hole kind of items are really the game changer that makes the storytelling more compelling and is a bit of a deus ex machina for the players as well. Are the mechanics of the item even fun? This is one of the hardest ones to get right, I think. There are plenty of items out there that are very complicated and frankly are hard to remember for a single player, even for many players. A great example for that, in my opinion, is Deck of Many Things. I have no idea what every single card does when I use the item. Someone draws a card, I have to look it up every single time. While some of the effects are enjoyable, that doesn't necessarily mean that the mechanics are very fun. Another example is that one of the cards in the deck of many things talks about XP, but we use milestone level up, so it again doesn't really matter, and also it disbalances the party's XP, and it kind of sucks. So there are some mechanics where you have to be really careful on how and when and where to implement them, that you might end up making an item that's just not enjoyable in the sense of D&D mechanics, while the idea that you have is actually quite genius. In that case, you just have to find a way to simplify what you're trying to do with the item while still having the same effect. This is especially hard when you don't have the time or resources or place to actually test these items and mechanics. Even now, I've played session after session after session with people, and I still sometimes get the question,
so can I attack with my offhand weapon now?
Is that a bonus action?
how many attacks do I get again as a fighter at level 5?
And when I use action surge, do I get my bonus action back?
Questions like these come up all the time, and the mechanics to these aren't actually that complicated. So now imagine you have an item that has 16 paragraphs to explain what the item actually does. No player is ever going to use that. While you may have poured a lot of time and thought into the item, if it's unusable for the player, or the player thinks, I don't remember this item at all in the moments they need it, it's probably not a good item. In my opinion though, a good mechanic is something new and fresh that isn't overwhelming or mentally straining. Using percentages, for example. If you want to use them, try and stick to quarters or halves, maybe thirds in some cases, but even then it can be a bit finicky. So I try and stay away from these kind of things and just make them straight cut dice rolls instead. No one wants to think about, oh, what's 55% of my 60-12 that I just rolled? It's just not fun. It slows down the session, and if you have an idea that uses these percentages, there might be a better rule set for you out there than this one. My recommendation here is just, if you have an item that has complicated mechanics or mechanics that interfere with the original game mechanics, maybe ask on one of the many homebrew subreddits out there if anyone would be down to test the items for you. Chapter 4. Is the item even useful in any situation? It's very much up to you as the DM. It's a very simple question. If it's combat-oriented magic items, then if it can deal damage, it's probably going to be useful in some way. But that's not always the case for magic items that aren't meant for combat. Puzzle solving or hurdle crossing items, like spells like Misty Step, which can be used in combat but is also a common puzzle solver for
How do we get across this gap?
and items need to be the same. A magic item should have something that solves a problem that you as the DM present to the player. Obviously, you shouldn't just use a magic item and then never have a problem come up that uses this magic item, otherwise you just gave them junk. If you're a new player, just keep these things simple. A simple rope that is infinitely long, or a torch that never goes out. Things like these are common magic items that can solve simple problems for most adventuring parties, and most adventurers will come up with an issue that needs exactly this solution. But there are some unique magic items to solve unique issues. For example, I have a magic item that is a coin that is also a pet mimic. You can pay things using this gold coin and infiltrate places like a black market for information. Not every campaign will have a situation where infiltrating a black market for information is of any use to you. You as the DM have to create situations that correspond to the magic items you give to your players, and give magic items to your players that correspond to problems. But that is not to say that our players aren't incredibly creative unless they are in front of a kindergarten level puzzle. Most of the time players come up with solutions for puzzles that were never in the scope of what we thought. They might never even look at the item when looking at the problem and solve it some other way that you as the DM feel like, yeah, that makes sense. Don't worry. There will be another chance for you to use the item, or you just present another puzzle where the item could help. And if not, that does not make your magic item bad, as long as there is a problem that it can solve. This is quite the flexible category that you can probably drop sometimes even. When we look back at what I said earlier with the Cloak of Billowing, it's an item that does nothing 99% of the time, but makes for fun flavor, or maybe it can be useful in a social situation. But these situations are very few and far between. An item that can still be fun flavor-wise is what brings me to number 5. Can I use this item as lore or flavor? World building questions to me are very important and very fun as someone who homebrews everything. I homebrew my campaign, my world, my items, my creatures, my NPCs. Is a magic item that serves only as a piece of lore in my world any good by itself? Yes, and kinda no. Maybe you have a group of players that really do not care for the world they are in, and they're just along for the ride. They don't take notes, they're just here for the action, for the now, the moment. On them, flavor can be a little lost, or the lore can be a little lost. They just want the effect of the magic item. In which case, yeah, that happens, and it's a shame that they don't pay as much attention to the small fine details as you would like them to, but such is the life as a DM. Sometimes we come up with ideas for our world that our players just overlook and we never get to use it again. With magic items, you can't really just reuse the lore somewhere else, but they have the lore with them. So going back to whether or not just lore on an item is good enough, no, probably not. It is much more fun to have an item that immerses you more into the culture and the world that the DM is building. So try and give your characters as much information through magic item as you can, because like I said, I know we've all been there, that we had some character hold a monologue or had a piece of paper with ancient lore on it, but the players didn't really pick it up or pay too much attention to it. But players love magic items. If you have to convey any kind of lore, give them a magic item. They're gonna pick it up. They're gonna take it with them. The best part about this category is, of course, that you can take an existing magic item that you know is good, because hundreds of people on Reddit have recommended it to you, and write your own lore about it. And that alone already makes an item a better item, I think. Chapter 7, if you're a new D&D player, you might not be fully aware that there are definite tiers to the different classes. Our job as a DM is to make every player feel they belong. Give everyone a role and give everyone a moment to shine. With magic items, we get the unique chance to give every single class something new that elevates them to the level of those classes that are just made a little bit above the rest. Giving a martial class a hat that can be used as a source for spellcasting, but it also allows the wearer to cast a cantrip from a spellcaster once a day. That alone gives a martial class whole new perspective on what they can do and how they can contribute to the party in problem-solving issues like puzzles or social encounters, without being limited to I'm a barbarian, I intimidate them. That alone is something that we as DMs should be taking full advantage of. Even more so with our own magic items that we make. All those little items that don't have to blow the whole class system out the window can help us make players feel more engaged in roles that weren't initially meant for that class. Sit down with a new player, for example, and ask them, hey, these are kind of like the limits and capabilities of your class. Is this what you had in mind for what you want the character to do and represent? And maybe they hit you with an idea for what they want their character to be that isn't fully represented just from the class or subclasses themselves, and you could come up with a magic item that maybe supplements their character fantasy a bit more. It's much easier and much more fun than you would expect. Veteran players, maybe you can come up with great ideas for your DM to be like, hey, I know the limits of my character and I feel I am underrepresented in these situations. Maybe you could help me out with like a magic item or something. Nowadays, every class can be good at everything. Magic items should be a supplement to that, I believe. They should offer something new to a class, and if they can, that's a good magic item right there. I don't know what chapter number I said for the previous one. Chapter 7. But I'm pretty sure this is chapter 7. Is it a problem solver for a problem that you created? Sometimes as DMs we make errors. Players might not like retconning, or you as the DM, you might not enjoy retconning things. You accidentally misplaced a plot hook, your players missed something, you said something wrong or anything like this, and now you need to find a solution to steer them back on the path perhaps. You created an absolutely immovable object that seems weird to retcon. Well then, how about you just give them an item that fixes it? I once had a campaign where players entered a library that had a section of it blocked up using a barrier. I then sent them off to find an item that can help them break the barrier. So they got a Ring of Disintegration. No, Ring of the Ram, I think it was. It specifically stated this thing can break barriers. You can use it as a bit of a fetch quest, to use it as filler for a point of interest that you have. You can use items like these to fill up spaces in between travel sessions. For example, you have your party travel from point A because they couldn't continue there to point B, where they think the story continues. On the way to point B, they find a point of interest. There they find a magic item that could help with point A, where they left. It gives your players a bit of a sandbox feel without being too sandboxy. Chapter 8, a very fun kind of chapter. It kind of plays in tandem with the chapter about whether or not it is an ace up the sleeve kind of item, like the X Factor item, because you could introduce an item that is simply meant as a one-time power trip. My players right now live in a world that has been completely annihilated, and all that's left are floating islands, remnants of an ancient war between gods and another race. Obviously, exploring these places, they might come across one of these ancient artifacts that is just a piece of history from this war, and it will be incredibly powerful. It will be a god-slaying artifact, but obviously it's ancient, so it's probably gonna crumble to dust the moment they use it. You can always introduce an item that is incredibly powerful. Here's your one session of power trip, and then it breaks or it disappears. Make them a stationary weapon, for example, and while you're here, you can immediately annihilate a mountain. That can be very fun for players. On top of that, it can also again be a very useful tool to pre-plan encounters. I really enjoy very hard boss fights. It will make for a Deus Ex Machina kind of situation once again. And I really like seeing my players when they pick up an item and I start reading out what it does and it's something ridiculously overpowered and they're like, are you sure? It is just a very fun moment to see the players' faces light up when they realize what kind of damage they can do with this one item. I can highly recommend trying this out. Don't do it too often, but every now and then this can make a really, really good magic item. Before we get to the most important point 10, let's talk about number 9, which is, will you regret giving this item to your players? It's just gonna be some general advice that I want to give. Sometimes magic items will simply break the narrative or simplify an encounter to the point where it's not fun. I know I talked about overpowered items that can completely nullify encounters, but this is not what I'm talking about. Sometimes there are items that repeatedly simplify an encounter to the point that other players cannot enjoy the fight, for example. That can happen with any magic item for various reasons. Maybe you thought, yeah, this item is a one-time use item, that's why it's stronger, but then your players found a way to mechanically break the whole thing, and now they have a reusable one. Maybe you didn't expect an item to actually be as strong as it is, and you didn't make it expendable, like using charges. Just because your item maybe broke something doesn't make it a bad item in itself. You can always adjust it further to balance it out. The value of an item depends on the classes in the party, the amount of players in the party, the setting of the world, is it rural, is it urban, is it exploration, is it dungeon crawling, is it... All these factors change how an item interacts with the world so much that maybe an item that is overpowered in someone's game is incredibly weak in another person's game. Always be aware that you might have to tweak them a little bit. And again, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of magic items out on the internet right now that you can get for free, use in your games. They might not be optimal, and there's like nothing wrong with having to test an item and realizing, oh, this item actually, this is not good for the table, we're removing it again. That is where my big, most important golden number 10 comes in. Are your players having fun? Not every player likes the same things in D&D, and your players will be just the same. They will like different things. Might be 4 players at your table and all 4 players like something else. Just introduce magic items. If you think they're too strong, try them out with them. If they're having fun, it's fine. The most important thing that you have to consider is to talk to your players communicate with each other, and find what is fun. D&D isn't about being optimal. D&D isn't about being perfectly balanced. D&D is not about having the best magic items. D&D is not about having the most movie-like scenes. D&D is about having fun with your friends. So if a magic item is freaking you out or annoying you, take a step back, see if your players are having fun. If someone's not having fun, talk to them, talk what it's about, and if it's about a magic item, change it. If changing doesn't fix it, just remove it. Having fun at the D&D table is more important than any magic item you could come up with. Trust me. If it's not a one-shot, you're gonna have many sessions. So maybe you have to use 3 of those sessions to get the magic item just right so everyone can enjoy it. At the end of the day, you as the DM make the rules, you make the world, you expel magic items if they don't fit. So have fun playing, have fun talking with your friends about it, and have fun homebrewing magic items from now on. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for listening in. If you enjoyed listening to my 10 rules for making magic items, please hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and leave a comment for how you make your magic items, what's important to you, and I really hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. I guess I really do know my stuff when it comes to D&D, huh?